Hello and welcome to Your Mass Rainbow Nation, where we discuss and dissect issues pertaining to South Africa, and sometimes we try to kind of link it back. Well, most of the time, I'm trying to link a lot of things back to the apartheid era and how the decisions and some of the things that were done in the apartheid era continue to disproportionately affect Black people. And today, I want to begin with the drug epidemic, especially in South African townships. And one of the most severe projects and most sinister projects to ever be conceptualized by a person. And this was very deeply inhumane. So yeah, hey, let's get it. Okay, let's get into this. Okay, so today we are talking about um Wouter Basson. And every time I say this man's name, chills go up and down my spine. The other thing that you'll notice throughout this video is that I'm going to be using, I don't know if you've watched Adventure Time, there's a character in Adventure Time called Ricardo. I'll put a picture of Ricardo here. there's, there's this character, his name is Ricardo. And I've always found Ricardo very fascinating because one, he's a heart. Two, he's very evil, but I guess I don't know. He operates on this very right from a very righteous, I guess, standpoint. And most interestingly, he walks around with a a broken bottle, the top of a broken bottle. And this is how one of the substances that Dr. Death or Wouter Basson is so one of the substances that he is basically behind. They even used to call the substance Basson's brownies. Um, and it's Mandrax, also known as Quaaludes in the United States. South Africa is the only place where this drug continues to be manufactured, as we will see as we go along. But so this broken bottle is mainly how it is consumed. I remember seeing this, I think, for the first time on User, and then I saw it again, from somebody that I actually knew. And we all used to kind of, do naughty things together. And this one time I saw them doing this. Luckily, I did not participate because what I saw after that, and that image one like really stuck with me because I was like, what in the hell is this, And as I grew up in Port Elizabeth, right? Um, and and I would hear this name, like my mom and my aunts and things, talking about Basson this, Basson that. And in my early 20s, I finally had like so much, like I had access to the internet because now I had a job and things. And one day I was just like, let me research this Wouter Basson guy. And I just kind of went down this crazy rabbit hole of what the hell is this? And I remember there was a point where I was working on, I think it was like a novel or short story that was, kind of meant to, talk about all his experiments. I don't know where that ended up. So I'm saying this all to say that I've known this for so many years, but I've never just had quite the platform, right? Until now, right? When all of this kind of stuff, because when you talk about this, when you talk about the fact that, you know, the levels of addiction in South African townships is not something that is natural per se. It's not something that is our fault, as township dwellers, right? I know in my heart that this is orchestrated because when you look at the people who are hooked and addicted, these are people with immense potential. These are people who could have such fulfilling lives, right? in an instance where there is, and then maybe there's an unfortunate incident of war in South Africa, the bodies that are being consumed by alcohol and drugs are the bodies that are supposed to be fighting, right? And I always say, at the rate in which we are going, if we are to be engaged in a battle of any kind, it's going to be the women who have to go and fight because, you know, you know, the men are so ready to be out here fighting us, but that's a story for another day. Let's get into this mess, this messy, messy man who does not deserve the title doctor. Okay? So in 1981, right, Wouter Basson was working quite closely to the then South African president P.W. Botha. And P.W. Botha, so this was around 1981, and I think they could see that things are getting a little bit shaky. Like these K words are waking up, right? And I mean, this is maybe 5 years after Biko has died, and I believe there was immense unrest at the time. And black people were just like, no, no freaking ways, right? So P.W. Botha and Basson, right, decide that they are going to put their heads together and create chemical and biological warfare. That is the assignment. And this program was meant to be used against enemies of the apartheid state. Okay. Now, they called this Project Coast. And there was a reason why it was called Project Coast, because I believe that it was the coastal towns, like your Western Cape, your Eastern Cape, that were giving them the most trouble, right? And there was a lot of activists coming out of Eastern Cape, Western Cape. I personally grew up in Port Elizabeth, which is how I gained familiarity with things like Mandrax, Basson's name, being, like being on people's lips. So people always knew, but then it kind of sounds like you are entering conspiracy realm as the years go on and on and on, right? So Basson really locked in when P.W. Botha gave him this assignment in which he collaborated with the Surgeon General. So P.W. Botha, a couple of years later, goes on to say that he does not know Basson. He's like, I don't know who that man is. He denies him 3 times like Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, ne? So anyways, Basson was locked in. He hires researchers. He does a lot, man. And then he establishes shell companies, right? And the shell companies are Delta G Scientific. So it's Delta G Scientific Company, Reuterblatt Research Laboratories, Protechnik, and Infidel. Like, the names of these companies are just diabolical. Infidel. That's how I'm like, this man has Ricardio vibes. Like, anyways, and I think now what, like, this story has a lot of unbelievable twists and turns, but one of the most unbelievable twists and turns, and I mean like stop the cap kind of unbelievable, is that all these researchers, all these 200 researchers that he hired, say that they had no idea what he was working on, to which I say, stop the cap. Wow. So when he was later investigated, right, by the United Nations, they found that they had violated international agreements, which is researching chemical and biological warfare. And this was because the program, it developed a myriad of things, which was lethal toxins, as well as crowd control agents were a very central part, because remember, they are trying to suppress anybody who is speaking about the perils of apartheid. Here is a passage from a journalist who was reporting on Basson's trial, right? So This journalist writes, John Jurgens Theron, the South African Defence Forces chief ex- executioner, okay, um, testified that he personally killed hundreds of people. His nearest estimate was hundreds. He described Operation Duel in chilling detail. So, Operation Duel was something that was developed within day, right? Johan would have packages delivered to him, and these packages were people, likely people who were enemies, right, of the apartheid state. These were individuals, and basically they would be delivered to him in Namibia, and they would be loaded into a six-seater Piper Seneca aircraft. The pilot would remove the door and then he would bury it in the sand. The victims, with their hands bound, would be injected with what Tehran termed the lethal triple cocktail. It contained ketamine. Okay, I, I don't know what that is, and I don't know what that is, okay? So I'm going to write the substances down here. But these are three very strong muscle relaxants. And in overdose, they can cause sudden death and suffocation. Once sedated, they were stripped naked and the bodies would be loaded back into the aircraft. The pilot would fly up 100 nautical miles out to sea, and Theron would toss the bodies from 3,600 meters into the ocean. Theron told the court he insisted on killing them first because it would be inhumane to throw somebody alive into the sea. And even if sedated, he could gain consciousness on the way. He also acknowledged that a human body hurled from that altitude would be in pieces when it hit the water. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was systematic. Between 1979 and 1987, Theron conducted multiple runs with a maximum of 3 people per trip. After each mission, he'd return to the airfield, burn the victims' clothes with aviation fuel, refit the door, and fly home. And who supplied Theron with the drugs? It was our friend, Wouter Basson, our enemy, actually. Vast quantities of scoline, tuberine, legitimate muscle relaxants used in major surgeries, but fatal in overdose. But Operation Duel was just one program. Researchers Chandra Holt and Peter Falb documented the full scope of Project Coast in their investigation for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What they found was a biological warfare facility producing substances that had no defensive purposes whatsoever. Cigarettes contaminated with anthrax, whiskey laced with peroxide, a deadly nerve poison, milk containing botulinum toxin, the most poisonous biological substance known to science. These weren't theoretical weapons, they were actual products listed in what was known as the Verkoper list, the sales list found in Basson's possession when he was arrested, meaning that he was selling these things to people, to someone. Like, and this is the part that really will anger people because, his victims are very sparsely documented and not very well documented. And also, I think the other thing is that they were not really forthcoming, right? With who exactly did you take to Namibia? And I think that's the part I think that will always get to me when it comes to apartheid and us and people saying things like, well, you can't keep talking about apartheid. You need to forget about it. It's over. No, 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 no. In fact, if anything, we need to be talking about it more. I can't imagine being the family member of one of those people who was on that plane and not knowing like what happened to my family member. You know, the researchers discovered 60% of RRL's projects concerned potentially lethal toxins. Only 6% involved treatment or neutralizing agents. This wasn't defense, this was assassination infrastructure. When FW de Klerk ordered the program's halt, sorry, when FW de Klerk ordered the program to halt lethal agent production in 1990, Basson pivoted. Between 1987 and 1984, an arms corps subsidiary loaded CRT gas, more potent than regular CST gas, into nearly 12,000 hand grenades, rifle grenades, mortar bombs, and 1,373 artillery shells for the G5 system, which has a range of up to 40 kilometers. And then Basson began producing drugs. Delta G Scientific produced 900 kilograms of MDMA, ecstasy, between 1992 and 1993. They also produced massive quantities of Mandrax. These substances were allegedly sold. Listen now. Now I need you to open your ears and put on your thinking cap, as my teacher used to say. These substances were allegedly sold to drug dealers in communities active in the apartheid movement. Some have called these Basson brownies. So they knew. They knew. The drug dealers, they knew. I don't want to get into drug dealers, okay? On January 23, 1993, there was an alleged destruction of all these drugs and chemical agents. But just weeks later, in February 1993, the Coordinating Management Committee accelerated the program and made 6.6 million available to purchase starter chemicals from Croatia, including 500 kilograms of the very methaqualone that had just been destroyed. So methaqualone is a very important chemical in Mandrax, right? And we'll later see, because we're going to go off and travel a little bit well, I mean, we're going to go and travel a little bit with, what's this guy? Hamilton. But we'll get to Hamilton. I'm getting ahead of myself. But you'll see when we go and look at some snippets of Hamilton's pharmacopoeia from Vice, we'll see that this is a very central ingredient to Mandrax, right? Nobody knows where it all went, and the stockpile just disappeared, and no one knows what happens, or the people in power don't want to tell us, right? And again, it echoes very similar things of think like drugs just disappearing. And where do they don't just disappear. you know they don't just disappear, they are definitely consumed. And these drugs, they were not consumed by Basson himself. No, they were not. He wasn't sitting there getting high off the stuff. By 1997, the truth was catching up with Basson. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission had begun investigating Project Coast. The CIA tipped off South African authorities that Basson planned to flee the country. When the police arrested him in Pretoria, they found him carrying 1,000 ecstasy tablets. In his car, hundreds of Project Coast documents. So here's the thing now, right? And for me, that is why I feel like this project coast impacts us more than we can actually imagine, as a society, because we are not even sure if it stopped when and when PW Botha, ordered it to stop. He ordered a certain aspect of it to be stopped. And then when this man is found many years later, we are already in democracy. He is still walking around with these documents. He is still got ecstasy in his car. That, for me, is a person on a mission. And if we look around the South Africa that we have today, even if people are not directly sourcing from him, it's mission accomplished. The trial began in October 1999, and Basson faced 67 charges, including drug trafficking, fraud, embezzlement, 229 murders, and conspiracy to commit murder. The media dubbed him Dr. Death, and the nation wanted justice. But what happened next stunned everyone. I think I remember this day. I think I remember this day. You know, um, you know, home was tense. I think I remember my mom and my aunt crying. I'm not sure. But I remember, when Basson was testifying at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because there's actually a friend of my mom who is believed to have, suffered from one of these chemicals. And they were very close. And, it had such a big impact on them, so much so that even when they tell the story, it's almost like it's the craziest story you can ever imagine. But anyways, Judge Willie Hartzenberg systematically dismissed charges. 6 important charges gone, including 4 murder charges, because the judge ruled South African courts couldn't prosecute crimes committed in other countries. Because remember, these people were being killed in Namibia. The 67 charges dwindled down to 46. Basson called only one witness in his defense, himself. For 40 days, he testified about his work, admitting he'd learned about weapons of mass destruction from Saddam Hussein and had exchanged information with foreign governments. Technically, he argued, it was legal. On April 22, 2002, Judge Hartzenberg acquitted Basson on all remaining charges, calling the state's case fragmented and confusing. The trial had lasted 30 months. Basson walked free. So this is interesting, right? Because now you pull in a judge, an entire judge, saying that, hey, I don't see nothing wrong with what this man did here, right? So you also have, that's a huge gaslighting, especially if something happened to you. I think one of the people who something happened to was Paulo Jordan. He has quite a list of potential victims, but I mean, imagine something happens to you and then or you look at what is happening in your community and it's called confusing and fragmented. Yes, our reality right now is confusing and fragmented, right? Anyways, this story doesn't end there when it comes to this man, because the Health Professionals Council of South Africa tried to launch its own investigation, and in 2006, and they found Basson guilty of unprofessional conduct. Hence, we don't call him Dr. Basson anymore. He does not deserve that title. We call him Wouter. And if I call him Doctor, I'm so sorry. His name is Wouter. Wouter Basson. Okay? Son of a bitch. Like, for me, it's like, who birthed you? Who birthed you? Bless me. Who birthed you? Why is so? Ricardo, yo, okay. Anyways, so I think yeah. So the H, yeah, and there's a lot of money that actually went into the legal fight, and that is taxpayer money, because he has been trying to fight against the HSPCA, right? So we're gonna play a clip now from Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, and then we will.
Have any of you all heard of Wouter Basson?
What?
Wouter Basson?
What? Is it drug or is it what?
He was a doctor. He was a doctor people thought brought Mandrax onto the street in South Africa.
We never heard of it. We are not following the history of drugs. We are just smoking.
If there's one name to know in the history of South African Mandrax, it's Wouter Basson. In 1999, Basson was put on trial for his involvement in a secret chemical and biological warfare program, codenamed Project Coast. Basson claims to have weaponized street drugs like MDMA, LSD, and most prominently, Mandrax. He planned to use these drugs for crowd control purposes in the event of an anti-apartheid uprising. Yet the exact nature of Basson's crowd control technique remains uncertain. Talk to you later. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. It's great meeting you. Thanks a lot.
So as you see in that clip, Hamilton asks these young men who are basically using Mandrax from Soweto whether they know Dr. Basson, and they ask, "Is Dr. Basson a drug?" No, we don't. We don't care about the history of drugs, but I want to really put something to us, especially as relatively young South Africans, that we need to know more. We need to know more about what we're doing. And even if what you're doing is, I guess, morally incorrect, doing a little bit of research will not hurt, will doing a bit of research might actually be the thing that deters you. Um yeah. So I, like, as I said, I think in the video, and why this topic is so close to me is I grew up in Port Elizabeth, as I said, and I saw this drug really changing people around me, changing people I looked up to, changing people I grew up with. It just has a way of taking over an individual's life. So these Basson's brownies are usually referred to as Ipilis, right? Just simply like a pill, right? And you know, to this day, um, I have a family member that actually struggles with it. And when you think of Port Elizabeth was a hub of resistance, because if you look at when Steve Biko dies, Port Elizabeth is one of the places which held, very serious boycotts after Biko died, and very serious protests. And, and like, my mom grew up in Port Elizabeth, and by the time you were like 13, 14, you had no choice, but you had to be on the street, bruh, throwing stones. Like, they knew what this is about. I feel like, when I listen to my mom talk and their friends talk, and just how young they were, you can hear, you can feel that these people were about it. And when I say about it, I mean they were about our freedom. Like, literally, they came out the womb fighting for that shit. So it actually makes sense for Basson to choose a place um like PE. And I've written about PE in the context of meth as well. So there's variations, but I feel like this is Project Coast is like the toxic cancer that was just planted, and that is eating at people. And remember, with things like substance addiction, these things are meant to make us, I guess, numb to what is going on around us, and not be able to make you easily access feelings like joy and comfort and things like that, and like a willingness or a determination to do anything with your life. And I think that's one of the major things that I've noticed is that um you know like a lot of people, again, that I grew up with, like some of my own family members, my nieces, my nephews, once they engage, I'm coming, baby. Can I just finish the sentence? Once they engage in using, like, any determination to do anything else with your life, like, I think maybe that's where we can give things like alcohol and weed a pass, because maybe you still kind of want to, do something. You still want to get up in the morning and make something out of your life. You know what I mean? But now, when you reach a level of intense drug use like this, it becomes the center of your life, you know? You no longer dream of anything else. You no longer want to be anything else. You don't even want to wake up and take a bath. Like, it is it is bad. It is bad. And the fact that South Africa is the only place that continues to, you know, produce this drug, So I think what also motivated me to kind of, come in and really talk about this as well is, when I saw people like Hamilton Morris, who is the interviewer in that clip, coming to Soweto, and coming to see like what's going on, right? And one of the clips. Okay, we're gonna go to a clip now of somebody manufacturing how this thing is made, and I feel like I hope that Dr. Basson watched this and felt guilt for what he has done and what he has brought. Okay, let's go to the clip, and then we'll come back and we will dissect this clip. Okay.
To tell you again, it's not good for you.
When I go to the toilet, there was blood.
There's blood in your
I was using this thing.
blood in your urine.
Yeah.
It's known to cause bladder cancer.
Blood cancer.
Bladder cancer.
Okay.
Though the mechanism of the condensation is yet to be firmly established, it seems that inside the pot, as the temperature climbs toward 200 degrees Celsius, a reaction between the near equimolar quantities of orthotoluidine and N-acetyl-anthranilic acid begins with a carbonyl addition initiated by lone pair electrons on the toluidine amine, which generates a Zwitter ionic intermediate that, after a series of proton transfers from the ammonium cation and carboxylic acid, allows oxonium to leave as water. The water is removed by heat, driving an otherwise reversible reaction forward, and the amethine intermediate undergoes a concerted cyclization, producing quinazolinone after an additional proton transfer and the loss of a second oxonium as water, producing methaqualone.
The smell is very strong. You can smell the orthotoluidine in the air. The coke is currently boiling off the water before he transfers the reaction mix into a tub. It smells like orthotoluidine, which smells like burning rubber, which smells like cancer. That's a cancery smell, I'd say. He's about to prepare methaqualone freebase with this bucket of aqueous sodium hydroxide. That's the smell I like.
Me, I don't like it. Make my body itch.
Makes you itchy. Do you ever smoke the material yourself?
Never smoke it.
The cook just added a concentrated sodium hydroxide solution to the crude reaction mixture that's liberating the methaqualone freebase as well as orthotoluidine freebase, and it's boiling. It's a black tar. What is the step after this? What comes after this?
It must change to a flour.
To what?
To a flour. You'll see it.
Does this look good? Are you happy with the way it's going?
When it's doing like this, I know that there's money in my pocket.
Oh gosh. So, that clip really breaks my heart because, ultimately, right, a lot of things, especially when it comes to living in the township, right, is that it like so many things just become about you surviving, you having something to eat, you having, something to look forward to, at the end of each day. I don't know. And I think this is how these people find themselves in this trap. And I think, you should go watch the full documentary. It is like on so many levels. Like he even somehow, gets to be eating what's this thing? Abalone. It's linked to even abalone. There are people who pick abalone just so that they can have a fix. Like, it's crazy. And again, this is happening on the coast, right? So when he starts in Soweto, but now when he's tracing, how does this thing get here? He lands up in the Western Cape. He lands up where? On the coast. And what are we talking about today? We're talking about Project Coast. I hope that the things I am bringing together are coming together. And I just hope I'm not alone in this conspiracy land of mine, okay? So Basson also catches us up, on where Basson might be. And, so yeah, apparently he gives talks and things like that, but he didn't want to speak to Hamilton Morris for obvious reasons. But one of the things that Hamilton's investigation corroborates, right, is that Basson is behind the large-scale introduction of Mandrax into South African streets, right? Mainly during the apartheid era, right? Because we know those stockpiles did not disappear into anywhere, right? And I think that more than this thing about, because I think the general South African attitude that we have, and this is an attitude that I even myself battle with, right, is we are very quick to demonize addicts, right, without really holistically looking at the entire system. We love to focus on the person and how they are faulty and how dare you do this thing. And I know it's difficult. It's difficult when you are in shit for you to be saying, this is systemic, blah, blah, blah. Because the moment that you start to realize and understand that this is a systemic issue, that is the moment that you realize that shit, I can't do shit about this. I can't do nothing. Well, I mean, there are some things you can do, and maybe we can speak about some solutions at the end of the video. But I think that when we start to think critically, I think maybe it raises some of our limitations that we have as a people, as a society, and we begin to feel more and more powerless. But I think that we need to acknowledge and heal from such structural and generational violence, right? And we need to bring these wounds to the forefront. Because South African townships are being ravaged by the drug epidemic. I don't know if you live in a township, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm not making this shit up at all. And like I say, not everyone is using Mandrax, but Mandrax is there, and it's a popular, relatively popular. Why am I saying it's popular? Like, I know, I don't know, but like, people do use it. There's a man manufacturing and it's like, dude, the smell and the fact that he talks about the fact that he urinates blood sometimes, it means that it's also affecting him, because this is obviously not a scientific environment. It's not a lab. He's not wearing, the only mask that he has is like a cotton mask, and it's kind of just bringing up memories of like COVID times. Like when we were really out here wearing t-shirts on our faces. Like, that was a wild time. Anyways, and obviously, like, I think there are a number of factors that lead up to drug abuse, and it's things like unemployment, youth idleness, generational trauma, um, and communities that are still to this day dealing with displacement. And displacement, remember, displacement also does a lot to, I think I learned this from a from I think it was like a Native American teacher who was speaking about drug abuse in Native America and things like that amongst the natives. And he was saying that, right, because now, these people have been westernized. But, it's like I was saying earlier, like to have that purpose within the community. Like if a war arises, you've got your soldiers sorted, right? But, one thing is for certain, and sure, I know this for a fact, like, in the African context, is that a lot of the time you are not, you don't, it's like we're not like, I'm not saying we're not career driven people, but a lot of things to us as African people are like operate as a calling, right? Like you have a calling to be, a like my calling is to be a writer and a storyteller, so I would be the person maybe scribing and writing and doing all those things. Like I would still be doing this even in a different lifetime, or even in a different kind of society, right? And luckily, thankfully, I can find my place within the current westernized, urbanized society. I can still find my space of like storytelling, right? You find that there are people who have maybe callings to be soldiers, right? But there's no war, and maybe and maybe you're not necessarily the most conventional kind of soldier, so you might find yourself in a gang, so but anyways, what this elder was saying was that when these people lose this touch with purpose, this community, this ability to contribute positively and whatever, because when you don't have a job, it's like you don't have nothing. When you don't have a job, you ain't shit, right? and that, like, that's the reality we're living now, and it's not true, because um because I think in our original systems, we didn't rely on jobs, There were other things that could be done. You could work the land, and the land could work in conjunction with you, and the land could produce for you, produce your food and things like that. Like, but anyways, now we're straying a little bit far from the topic. But I'm just saying that a society that is very disconnected from its purpose often finds itself, so we were displaced as a people, meaning that even our ecosystems of living, of culture and things like that are dismantled and destroyed because we are removed from the environments that allow us to thrive in that way. Okay. Yeah. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of like, devastating drugs, and they are taking a lot of hold within black communities, and that really needs to be dealt with, you know um, the initial intent obviously was to keep the apartheid system going. And if you look around you, the apartheid system is still going. It's just that now, maybe our captors have been masked. They look like us, and you know we'll never fully know. And I also think, Hamilton Morris, mentions this in his documentary, where he's like, we're never gonna fully know or understand what this guy did, because he's not forthcoming. He's still very arrogant and and blatant about this, right? And I think that will be the end of part one, and then we'll delve into part two, where we're going to be, I discovered something very, very interesting about Jerry Boshocha that I would like to actually bring into part two of this episode. I think I should just like divide it into two parts for the sake of my own sanity. I'm not the greatest or fastest editor, and I find that when I'm editing an extremely long piece, I become, yeah, because I am busy with other stuff, right? So hopefully I don't take too long to get to part two, because I really want to talk about, you know, this current the current day where we are. Talk a little bit maybe about what Basson might be up to, and then we also just want to delve a little bit as well into solutions. You know, what solutions, you know, are there for us, because I feel that, you know, that is a very important aspect of talking about these issues. Like, yes, it's one thing to talk about them and be fascinated at this absolutely mad and crazy so-called scientist, you know, or so-called doctor who is just out here on a mission to destroy black people for, and you know, like ultimately for no reason, or for our resources and whatever. I have no idea. And I mean, of course, I'm not stupid. I know that it's not only black people or coloreds and Indians that smoke mandrax, but here we are talking about who is the majority of people who are caught up in those systems, you know, and why are things set up this way. And when you look at all these things that are being discussed in the Mahlanga Commission, the things that General Mkwanazi told us, saying that, you know, in Dawayama drugs, South Africa is very much interlinked with your senior politicians, you know. So then it means that they took something from the apartheid government and saw that, oh, okay, so this is another way in which we can make a bit of extra revenue on the side. But it's also a way in which we can keep these people kind of down there, you know. We can keep them, you know, subdued, silent, and, you know, yeah. But anyways, you know, I'm gonna digress. And, you know, even my partner knows when I start talking about these kinds of stuff, like, I can talk until tomorrow. And then editing becomes a nightmare. So I'll see you in part two of what are we gonna call this, of Dr. Dead's legacy. I don't know. I'll decide what I name the episode. Um, Thank you so much. And, you know, if you got all the way here, you may as well subscribe so that you can watch part two. And thank you so much. Please like the video and share the video with somebody who you think might find it useful, and, you know, and likes ramblers like me. All right. Have a wonderful day further. And thank you for listening to my rambles. And of course, tell me what you think of these kinds of situations in South Africa. Tell me what you think the solution might be to this havoc that we are living in. Or if you feel opposite, maybe you feel like we're living in a perfectly functional society and everything that we're experiencing is normal and all societies experience it. Either way, be blessed.